Alafia family, welcome to season 2, episode 3 of Black Girls Be Spiritual. So today we are reflecting on friendship, its purpose, its qualities, and of course, its divine design. I've come to realize over the years that many of us misplace people in our lives. We expect the wrong things from the right people and right things from people who were never meant to fill roles in our life. Sometimes, because of shared trauma, proximity, fictive kinship, we hold on to relationships that do not bear fruit. We love these people deeply. We've invested our time, our talents, our treasure, yet years and years go by and there is no harvest. Why? So Merriam-Webster defines a relationship as the state of being related or interrelated, the relation connecting or binding participants in a relationship, such as kinship, or a state of affairs existing between those having relations or dealings, or a romantic or passionate attachment. So, in other words, relationships are the ties that bind us, whether that is blood, marriage, shared purpose, common vision. The issue is that not all ties are meant to last forever. Some are seasonal, some are divine assignments, lessons, blessings. So, I am your host, Alexandria Danielle, and on this Productive Progressive Tuesday, we are leaning into divine friendship, sacred sisterhood, sacred brotherhood, alignment, partnership, communion, community. So, this podcast is for Black, Indigenous, people of color wanting to dig deeper into religion, spirituality, natural medicine, and all things divine feminine. I wanted to create a sacred space to share spiritual teachings and just to exist as a Black feminist, womanist, spiritualist, as a bookworm, bibliophile, self-proclaimed book whore, and hood geek. I love to devour books about ancient scriptures, psychology, sociology, spirituality, and all the things. I most like to make those things understandable, applicable, effective, and accessible for my friends and those around me. So some episodes will just be me sharing these divine downloads, revelations as I go deeper and deeper down the rabbit hole. And other days, I will have guests from various paths and walks of life on different missions, but ultimately, we as a collective of Black girls, we just be knowing, we be healing, and we be spiritual. And so I just want to sidebar and ground this in a little bit of Black feminism, because a question has been raised more than once of, oh, so is it okay for me to listen? Is this just for Black women? And I think that that is a fair question. I am not put off by the question, but I just want to clarify what Black feminism really stands for. And so feminism is for everybody, in my bell hooks voice. And in 1977, a group of women known as the Combahee River Collective put out a statement in which they said, if Black women are free, it would mean that everyone else would have to be free, since our freedom would necessitate the destruction of all the systems of oppression. And so, what that means is that across the globe, Black, brown women of color, green, blurple, olive, tan, yellow, red, of color, are usually the most marginalized group. Generally, these people are the darkest skinned people of their set, caste, class, ethnicity, region, land, etc. Now, I am from the Bahamas. Sidebar: the blacker the berry, the sweeter the juice. I do think us red bones get tossed to the side a little bit, and there is a standard of Black excellence and Blackness there that I do see in an all Black country. I'm not saying that colorism does not exist or has not exist prior to independence, but yeah. So but Black women are still the most marginalized group there. That is still true. That's still true. And yes, blacker the berry, the sweeter the juice. And Black women are still the most marginalized group. There's a lot of issue with marital law and uh, sexual assault laws and those kinds of things that I hope to uplift in the near future with some friends that talk about that on their platforms. And so across the board, what we're saying is if Black women are free, we are all free, because we have to experience multiple systems of oppression. We have to experience racism, sexism, and capitalism, and homophobia, and so if we are liberated, everyone else that exists in all of those intersectional identities is free. And so, for context, I come from a large, beautifully complicated family, 8 brothers, 5 sisters. I love them all. I don't know them all intimately in this particular age, but I pray for them all the same, and they all hold space in my heart in different ways. And so, family teaches us how to love imperfectly. It's where we first learn that idea of closeness, loyalty, growth. It's where we learn character, discipline. Black feminism allows us to understand the ways in which we Black girls learned to know how we know what we know, which is why I have this saying, Black girls be knowing, because one of the tasks that we take on when we step into this world that I'm in is the task of reclamation, the task of like uplifting voices that have not been heard and that have been silenced. And so little Black girls, our stories have been silenced. And so you'll hear throughout this podcast me reference childhood stories and my girlhood self over and over again. And it's because if the feminist, womanist, Gender Studies Academy taught me nothing else, it taught me how important it is to understand coming of age and girlhood, and how we navigate the world based on our upbringing, based on our environment, based on our family, based on systems of oppression around us, based on religion and ideals. And so you can understand so much about the way that you've evolved as a woman, positively or negatively, the ways that you've been stagnant, and the ways that you need to grow, the ways that you need to nurture yourself by revisiting those girlhood stories, not necessarily traumas, just those girlhood stories and understandings of self. And so Black feminism gives us the tools to do that kind of work and to do that kind of introspection and that reflective work so that we can then self-actualize and apply these things to say like, hey, this happened and this is why I think this way, or I move this way, or, you know, this is a trigger, and then we can then heal ourselves, right? Because that's the spiritual component to it, the knowing, the divine knowing, and then the applying of the wisdom that you then find as a Black woman, which sometimes is kitchen table wisdom from auntie, mama, friend, sister, bestie, right? That embodied knowledge, that feminist epistemology, that way of knowing that we just know. And then other times, you know, if you're a super geek like me, it's by deep research. And so then if I'm doing this deep research, a feminist lens says, I need to share my view of this research as a Black woman who lives in America, who was born in the Bahamas to a biracial parent, who is one of many siblings and a mother and a wife and a African traditional spiritualist and a Catholic and a wife of a Muslim and, you know, a transnational citizen. And okay, so if I'm looking through all of that, what does this mean to me? And how can I use all of those different identities, all of those different, all those different structures of class, ethnicity, race, understanding, and privilege to then share what I learn with others so that they can make it better for them, their life, their, you know, their way of seeing, their way of knowing. What can they take from all of those different lenses? Because it sounds to me like there's something for everybody, um, if that's the truth. And so that's why you hear me over and over again in these episodes ground myself in these reflexology statements before I get talking. And it's because I always want to help you to understand my lived experience, where I come from, what lens I'm looking through, so that you know where we connect. You know, do we connect as Caribbean people? Do we connect as Bahamian people? Do we connect as Floridian people? Do we connect um, as Gator Nation people? Do we connect as children of biracial parents? Do we connect as Catholic schoolgirls? Do we connect as children of Jehovah's Witness family? Do we connect as estheticians? Do we connect as nail techs? Do we connect as Reiki practitioners, doulas? You know, all of these different identities and things that I've experienced then is a connection piece, a relational piece, a way to relate to someone else. And so with that being said, I'm the eldest daughter on both sides of my family. Okay. I have 3 older brothers, 2 of whom are a year older than me. One I affectionately call twin. Shout out to Big Lex. My eldest brother, Junior, is 7 years my senior, and he was definitely a protector figure growing up. He was kind, gentle, and very attentive to me as a young girl. And from my father, I have 3 sisters that are full-blooded Bahamians. And from my mother, I have 2 sisters. One is Jamaican Bahamian and one is Bahamian American. There's a 7-year age gap between me and my next sister from my mother, and 12 years between me and my youngest sister from my mother. And I think 13 years between me and my dad's youngest daughters. So technically, I'm a middle child, but as any eldest daughter knows, I'm like then technically the oldest, right? Period. Okay. So trust me when I say I've seen all the things, okay? From prison to Paris, from scholarships to scandals. I have witnessed all ends of the spectrum. And these experiences have taught me a lot about tolerance, about love, about companionship, about expectation, and about the bones and architecture of relationships. And so a couple years ago, I was in Atlanta on a trip I was still owning a full service spa at the time. Shout out to Spa Boss Tribe. It was a business trip. And a sister friend of mine called because she was really wrestling with friendship and how, as she's evolved, her friendships have felt like one sided. And she's invested deeply and she wasn't seeing emotional and spiritual growth on the other person's part. And she was really frustrated. And so I reminded her that in our early 20s, in the church that her and I attended together, we had a lesson that a minister did about the 3 types of friendship that always stuck with me. And he, at that time, referenced Jesus and Peter, Simon, Paul and Timothy and the community. And so back when I first explored this, I hadn't yet gone to graduate school and fully embraced my feminist lens. So now, as a womanist, spiritualist, I absolutely cannot talk about divine friendship without centering women in the scripture who've been silenced or minimized in patriarchal interpretations. So to make this conversation whole, I have to reclaim some of those stories. And so, of course, this led me to the OG text of the Bible, the Torah and Talmud, the Hebrew scriptures. In there, I found myself in the book of Judges, the book of Ruth, and I also found myself in Luke in the New Testament. And so I was looking for divine feminine friendship written between the lines of history. And it really wasn't between the lines. It was front and centered. And I was very pleased to see that. And so I want to talk about types of friendship and not necessarily the 3 types. I have this broken down a little bit differently. So bear with me. I talked about this on Instagram Live, I think in 2020. And I don't want to give that exact same word because 5 years later, the word has evolved. And I really sat in meditation with Holy Spirit to receive this word because it's imperative to me that I hear from God and then interpret it through this womanist lens. And it's just been a beautiful thing. There's a great book right now, not right now, but I've been reading it for years because I'm videotaping today. I will show it. It's called Woman Witness. And it's a feminist lectionary and psalter of the women from the Hebrew scriptures. And it's a 3-part book. I have 2 of them. Woman Witness and Woman Wisdom. And so what these scholars did was they combed the Bible, really sitting in Holy Spirit, and pieced together some of the missing scripture. And it's a beautiful thing. That is not necessarily what I claim to do, but I do enjoy engaging with these texts as I'm preparing for these podcasts because it's very important for me to give an applicable word. I don't want to be on here just talking and talking. And I really take time out and hear from God on these messages. And I listen to a lot of podcasts, and I have 4 kids and a dog running around here and a husband. I'm a wife. And I listen to podcasts where there are kids in the background and there are dogs. And I'm like, awed. I'm like, oh my gosh, I wish I could do that. Because in all authenticity, like, that's who I am. I want my kids in the background. I can hear one of them in the room right now. But because I'm talking about spiritual matters and I'm hearing from God as I talk, and a lot of times what I write isn't even what comes out, I can't really have that distraction. And so maybe as I grow and I have more earphones and tools, I'll be able to live like that. But right now, I need a little bit of silence. But nonetheless, so the first type of friend that I want to talk about is this idea of the sharpening friend, divine accountability. Okay. So in Proverbs, the book of wisdom, written by the wisest man who ever lived. That's what they say. It's King Solomon. I think I would argue that Orula, is the wisest man who ever lived. But because I believe in reincarnation, who knows? King Solomon could be Orunmila and Orunmila could be King Solomon. I don't know. Someone put in the comments and let me know if you know something. Quote an Odu or something for me, please. And so in Proverbs 27:17, it says, as iron sharpens iron, so one person sharpens another. Maferafun Ogun, my first Baba, the spirit of iron. Among the Yoruba people, the spirit of iron is Ogun, the Orisha of war, technology, justice, innovation, labor. Oh, Ogun is the first person to clear the path through the wilderness so that humanity can move forward, so that humanity can build. One of his tools is the machete. If you think of the machete can like chop down thatch, it can chop down bush, and it can also be used to build and to carve. And so this iron energy is destructive and creative, but that tearing down is only to build back up, right? And so in ancient world, iron tools were sharpened by striking and scraping against hard metal. It was rough. It was a lot of friction. It was loud. Nothing about it was quiet and gentle. So when we say iron sharpens iron, we are really invoking this energy of Ogun, this alchemy of tension, right? Purpose, progress. And so if you think of a blade, a knife being dull, my kitchen girls, like you are more likely to cut yourself with a dull knife than a sharp knife because it's going to slip. You don't have any grip. You don't have any foundation. You don't have precision. Okay. And so when you're sharpening, not only are you strengthening your tools, but you're also allowing them to be more precise when you utilize those tools. And so when we translate this into human relationships, it just really, really reminds us that love is not soft. It's supposed to refine us and it's supposed to polish us. And so this should be a lovingly polish, but iron is sharp and iron is hot and iron can be aggressive, right? Because even though we have to speak lovingly to our friends, if a person is a true accountability partner, you don't want a yes friend, you don't want a yes man, you don't want someone that just agrees with everything you say and that just goes along. That iron sharpens iron means that we hold space for one another to make errors, but we are sharing our wisdom and holding them in their power, reminding them of their purpose and telling them the truth, right? Maybe not publicly, maybe not in front of other people, maybe not in mixed company, but we're telling them the truth. And it's hard because in a patriarchal world, we're trained to compete with women. And this art of divine friendship, and this is the first time that just even came out of my mouth, art of divine friendship. Let me write that down. Y'all have to write that down because art of divine friendship, because it is an art. Friendship is not easy. I have a teenage daughter that's 18, and I often talk to her about grace with her friends, and I talk to her about how everyone is learning how to be a friend, and it takes learning, and it takes tolerance and knowing other people's love languages and what they expect out of friendship. And so in this iron and sharpening iron, you're saying like, hey, I see you're so great, but I also see your blind spots. Let me help you be better. Let me hold up the mirror for time to time. It might make you uncomfortable, but you can trust me because I love you. I'm here for you. I'm only here for you. I'm not here for your purpose. I'm not here for your vision. I am here for you. And so with that, I'm on whatever you on. And I also will correct you behind closed doors, but I'm still on whatever you on. Now, this is an important segue here because In those iron sharpen iron friends, I feel as though there are multiple levels to that friendship. I say that because years ago, I used to say there are 3 levels of friendship: iron sharpen iron, someone that's pouring into you, and someone that you need to pour into. However, at this age and state, I realize that there are people in your work life who are your colleagues, who are your friends, who are your associates, who can still fulfill that iron sharpen iron role because they're on what you on. Meaning, like, you may love to trade stocks. Okay. You might like dividend investing and they like to swing trade. And so you share notes in the morning because y'all are both on that, and you do that for a decade. And that warrants a certain level of friendship and trust financially because y'all are on the same thing. And so you're sharpening each other daily and checking and balancing. Sometimes that can be like with church friends. You know, you might have a church friend, an accountability buddy that really holds you accountable and really loves you. The problem is that sometimes those people are not necessarily still a part of our inner circle and our most intimate friendship. And so I decided to deep dive back into the word to understand friendship more. And so, of course, I went to Papa Jake's, and his message really shook me. It was an old message. And he was talking about these different types of friendships. He really was talking about Jesus building a team and how Jesus had a team of 12, and like 3 was in his inner court, and like it was a really good lesson. I'll plug it into the notes. But he introduced this concept of comrades and constituents, and he talked about how a constituent is someone who is walking with you for a cause, okay, because you share the same campaign or mission or idea. And then he talked about a comrade and said a comrade is someone who is fighting with you. They're fighting for the same thing that you're fighting for. You have a shared battle or a shared campaign, but as soon as that cause ends, so does the connection. And so that means that a person could jump in your fight. They could fight for you. They could work harder than your friends. They can work and show up for you for years and then abandon you because they were not really there for you. They were there to fight because they were just a fighter, or they were there for a cause or a purpose like church, you know, or a volunteer work or some kind of club or organization, right? Or they were there, I'm going to then add in, for a season, for a contract, or for a condition. And so sometimes with mentorship or mentees, these can definitely be seasonal or contractual. There's a shared purpose, there's a shared mission, there's a shared ideal, there's a shared goal, or you have a goal or something that that person can help you get to. There's a sacred person, there's a reason, there's a service there. And so it doesn't mean that the friendship was fake. It doesn't mean that the friendship failed. It means that it served its purpose. And once that lesson has been exchanged, once that blessing has been exchanged, once that wisdom has been transmitted, once that money has been made, once that book has been written, once that play has been written, you know, whatever that is, spirit is going to move you to the next thing, because now you have other cups to fill, they have other cups to fill, you know, and those relationships are not permanent, they're not forever. I do think that there's an idea of like this lifetime spiritual teacher that the Buddhists talk about, your guru, and I think that's kind of like a different concept than what we're talking about here. I just want to say that. And so I really think that this idea of comrades and constituents really put my heart to peace personally for whatever was lingering left about these ideas of friendships, right? Um, I used to tell people who wanted to be my friends, but we're really like those fictive kin, um, like those play cousins and stuff. Like, you're my sister, you're my sister. And people would get offended because they would want to be my friend. And I would say, no, like, I have certain expectations and standards and boundaries with my friends that I might not have with you, because our moms were cousins or best friends or grew up on the same block. And so you have a different access to me. You might not have to call ahead of time. You can come in my house if it's not clean. Um, I'll give you my last $20. You'll give me your last 20. It's a different kind of relationship. And so with that, you know, um, sometimes we place those people in places that are these prominent roles, and they're not iron sharpen iron relationships, right? You're pouring, or they're pouring. And so you want to say, like, you're really my sister. And because I give my sisters anything, it doesn't matter if we fight, if we fall out, if we fuss, we're still sisters when it's done. And so I always felt like that was a divine title to call someone a sister. But people get offended because people want to be your friend. And that's interesting concept to me. And so I want to move forward because the clock is ticking and I still have quite a bit to get through. I didn't do a podcast last month. And so I really took my time preparing this lesson. And so the second type of friend I want to talk about, divine mentorship. And so this is essentially what we say when we say someone that is pouring into you so that you are full, so that you can then pour into others. And so, there's that saying, you can't pour from an empty cup, And so when I started to think about this concept of pouring, as always, when messages are divinely guided, and I sit in patient obedience, I turned on my Spotify and I was listening to the last episode of Black Girls Be Spiritual just to reground myself. And one of my mentors, whom I accredit much of my success to and my way of critically thinking, he's a professor and a pastor, and he also has a podcast called The Bible Speaks. And he was speaking about using your spiritual gifts for the community and for others. And he was talking about the word pour. And so I decided to look into the word pour for myself and see what the Bible explicitly says about it or how it was being used. And so the Bible used the word pour nearly 62 times in the King James Version and 80 times in the NIV. And so the Bible uses the word pour to talk about the release of an abundance of something, um, an overflow of something, and not necessarily always something positive, because it could definitely be Jehovah God of the Old Testament pouring out his wrath. And it could also be him pouring out his blessings that you do not have room enough to receive. Right. And so I looked up synonyms, not synonyms, synonyms for the word pour on Word Hippo, which is a website that one of my mentors, shout out Dr. Adams, gave me when I was working on my thesis to write better papers. And Word Hippo, I looked up the synonyms and I found words like gush, stream, surge, cascade, flow, overflow, course, drain, rocket. And so this word pour essentially means to send forth, as in a stream, to let something escape freely or wholly, or to flow continuously and abundantly. So when you're pouring something, you're giving a healthy serving of it. You're covering or immersing something in it. It's a place of overflow and it's a place of abundance. So when we're pouring, into others, we should not be draining ourselves. We should be channeling spirit, and we should be pouring from a place of abundance, pouring from a place of abundance of wisdom and abundance of knowledge and abundance of ashe, power, energy, right? We should be essentially pulling on that energy from the generation behind us ancestrally, and and channeling from the future's potential. And that was super metaphysical, and I'm so sorry that I went there, but at the same time, it's the truth. We should not be pouring from an empty place, right? Like when I'm talking to you right now, I have so many things written down, and we haven't even gotten to those pages because I am pouring from a cup that has been filled for the past month. I've been in my Bible, in my study with my friends, you know, uh, pouring into myself so that I'm able to do this and hear from God, right? So it's a pour. And so this idea of divine mentorship,